Hi, I'm Ian from Richmond Tweed Regional Library, and I'm here this afternoon to show you how to make slime. Now, maybe you can have a look at what's on the table here because that'll give you an idea of the ingredients. It's actually very simple. Most important one is PVA glue. That's got long chains in it which are critical. And then borax. Now this is something you'll need your parents to buy from the store because it is used as a cleaning agent, and it can do you harm if used in concentrated solutions. And I've got food dye here. I've just got a red and a blue, some fairly simple colours. You can try your own for making things like turquoise or green or various other colours. So I'm going to show you two recipes, and as I mentioned before, with the borax, it is a concentrated crystalline form when you buy it. What I've done is already pre-mixed it, and so I've used 1 cup of water and 2 teaspoons of borax. So that's roughly a 1 to 25 solution in there, so you should have those sorts of measurements you can use at home fairly easily. Now, you may want to come in closer so that you can see as I mix things. And so now that you're closer to the table, what I have here is about 1/8 of a cup. I think that would be around 25-30 ml of glue. I don't want to use too much because what I find is that even a small handful is enough to deal with. So I'll empty that into the bowl, the mixing bowl. That's probably enough out of there. And now I'm going to add twice the amount of water. So it's going to be 2 to 1 ratio, twice as much water as the PVA glue. So that should be a bit under 100 ml total. I've got a second bowl here which I use for keeping all the dirty stuff. It just reduces the amount of mess that you have on the table afterwards. And I can tell you it can be hard to control the amount of mess. Now what I'm doing here is I'm mixing the water and glue thoroughly before I do anything else. So that I think is good enough. And next step is to add the colouring. So let's try blue. Now what I find is probably, if there's something you may not have at home, but I would recommend if it's available to use a pipette, because what I find is even just doing it this way, I always add too much and your slime just has too strong a colour. And if it's too much colour in there, then it just doesn't stay in the slime. It ends up all over your hands. So I'm just trying to add just a very small amount. There we go. I think 1 drop will be enough. It'll be a fairly pale blue, but enough. If you make it any darker, as I say, what will happen is it'll be a dark sea. And look at that. Look, see how dark a blue. I think even this may be too much dye, that it could stain your hands a bit if you play with it a lot. So now that the food dye has been mixed in, this is when the fun starts. This is when you now add that borax solution. So remember before, this is 1 cup of water and 2 teaspoons of the borax crystals. So I'm just going to add 1 teaspoon at a time. And what you'll see is where I add the borax solution, it already starts to turn into slime. It starts to react in the center there. You can see it's getting a bit, maybe I need to tilt this. You can see how it's creating some slime just with that 1 teaspoon of the borax mixture. So I'll go ahead, just from experience, I'll add another 2. It'll probably require 4 of these teaspoons to get a good mixture, and I'll explain why. But you can see just with 3, it's slowly reacting. I mean, it's a fast reaction as far as chemical reactions are concerned, but it still takes a little bit of time. You can see it's gradually starting to link a lot of those chains. Now I was telling you before about the PVA being a glue that has lots of long chemical chains in it, and what the borax does is link between those chains and turn what's like a thick liquid into more like a solid. So you can see now how it's become very much like a solid with those 3 teaspoons. Now let me just, this is the interesting test. If I touch it and I haven't got enough of the borax solution, it'll be very sticky and it'll stick to my fingers and it'll be, yeah, so it's still quite tacky. You can see how it's sticking to my fingers. So what I'd recommend you do is add another teaspoon, and what that does is link up more of the long PVA molecules so that even less of the PVA is acting like a glue and more of it's acting like slime, and then it becomes much easier to deal with. And when you've got enough of the borax solution in there, you can pick it up without it sticking to your fingers too much. So I'll just clean up this spoon. That's one good thing with the slime, is that it seems to bond to itself, and you can use it to clean up your bowl. Now, this is one of my favourite mixtures where you've got 2-to-1 ratio of water to the PVA glue, and what you end up with is a slime that is actually quite liquid almost. You can see how quickly that is sort of drooping. What we can do next is make another mix that has less water with the glue, and you'll see that it's more solid. But first, what I'll do is take this and put it into a plastic sandwich bag, because then you can keep it and reuse it and play with it at another time. And from personal experience, it can last you more than 6 months. I have some that have lasted that long, where I just keep them sealed in a jam jar or in a plastic bag. Okay, back again now to make a slightly different recipe, but I'll just show you. This is what I managed to do with the previous one. This is the 2-to-1 mixture of water to the PVA glue. You can see how it's sort of spreading out over the plastic bag, and you probably watch that as I go ahead and make this second batch. Now for this second batch, I'm going to use a high concentration of glue. It's going to be 1-to-1 of water to glue. So I'm using again around 1/8 of a cup. This was a 1/4 cup measure, and I'm using roughly half of that. And then I'll put in about the same amount of water and mix that with the glue. So that's roughly half of the container again. Clean that out a little bit. Okay, good enough. Into the dirty bowl. So now, I've got a thicker concentration here of glue and water. And just repeating what I did before, just mix it thoroughly so that it's all about the same consistency. This time we'll make it pink. And again, similar thing before about making sure that you don't use too much of the dye, otherwise you can end up with stained hands. So I'm just trying to control it so it's really just a very small drop. Oh, it's a bit too much in the cap. See if I can control this better. Come on. There we go. Hopefully that's going to be enough. I mean, even pink is good. Right, so let's mix this in. It's still quite a red colour, but good enough. Now, this is where the interesting bit happens, where we add the borax solution. I'll just repeat what I said before. Borax is fairly reactive. It's used as a cleaning agent. This is where you should get your parents to help. I think they'll need to buy it from the supermarket and then supervise you with the dilution process. And what I have here, as I said before, is 1 cup of water, and I've used 2 teaspoons of the borax crystals in here. So this is already pre-mixed. Sometimes it can take, you know, a few minutes to actually dissolve. Just as a hint, I used warm water to help it dissolve initially. So now let's go ahead and add our solution. I'll add 2 to start with. You may remember before I added 3 before really mixing. what I find is when you have a higher concentration of glue, it just seems to react faster. You can see there it's going to go solid, and I would say I'm going to need at least another teaspoon of the borax solution to bond all of the PVA chemical molecules. There we are, starting to bond better. And I'll just point out, it took me a while to get that blue slime into the plastic bag because I don't think I added enough borax solution. It was still very sticky, kept on sticking to my fingers, so I'm going to be cautious this time and add a little bit more of the borax solution so it doesn't stick to my fingers too much. So there's the 5th teaspoon going in there. So you see how much more solid it is. You may remember that the blue slime, which was the 2-to-1 ratio water to borax, was quite runny, for want of a better word, like thick or cold honey. Now this is more solid, more like rubber in fact, and as I just try to mix everything together, it starts to stick to itself and pick up all the other loose bits and pieces. Now I could keep on doing this to completely clean out the bowl, but for the interest of time I'll just leave it at that for now and put that aside. And so now you can see where I've got more glue and less water in this mixture. It's not as runny, and in fact you may find, I'll just move that out of the way, hopefully this won't affect the speaker, it might even bounce. So that's something that probably wouldn't happen with the more diluted solution of PVA slime that we made initially. And if I pull this apart too fast, it'll just snap, whereas with the more diluted PVA slime, you could stretch it apart quite quickly. I mean, this, you can still stretch, and it still has very similar properties, it's just more solid. And at some point it'll start to droop all the way down to the table. But as you can see, it's much more solid than the previous mixture. One final last fun activity. What I'm going to do is mix these two slimes together, something I think you'll enjoy because you can watch all the colours mixed together. So I've emptied the blue slime out of the plastic bag and put it on the table. You can see how sort of soft and runny it is compared to our pink slime, but you can just mix it together. It's addictive. I find I can play with this all the time, even though I'm not a kid, really. Now, actually, I should point out some other slimes, because not only is there this borax PVA slime that you can use, there are other alternatives. I mean, there's one that a lot of people like to use because it's edible, and therefore probably safer than this, which is not edible, and that is using cornstarch. And from what I've learnt, one of the best options is to mix cornstarch with yogurt and use food dyes with that. Now, you end up with a slime that is not as slimy, I should say, is what it doesn't have this sort of property. It sort of breaks apart more easily. So I think in terms of slimes that are fun to play with, this is more fun. But it's not edible, and the edible slime is still worth experimenting with. As I said before, it's just a mixture of cornstarch and yogurt, and just get the right proportions to get the right sort of sliminess. Thank you for joining me today. Now, if you make some slime at home, we would love to see it. You can send it to us on Facebook or tag us on Instagram at Richmond Tweed Regional Library.